Hey everyone, Ryan here. I am a Bible nerd. Today I want to tackle a comment video on one of my favorite videos on YouTube, one of my favorite channels. He's been putting out content a little more consistently and just love interacting with this content and wanted to do just a review video of it, watch a little bit with you and have you hopefully watch the whole video and like his channel. I really recommend it that you like, subscribe, check out his channel. So you can see his name right here. The topic today is Does God Exist? AI debates atheist versus believer. So what he's done is he's created these two different AI programs to basically debate each other. One is an atheist, one's a believer in God, and then has AI programs judge their answers and then see where those programs kind of bias or which way that they lean after the entire conversation is over. And what I love about this format is it gives you a chance to listen to a debate without it turning into personal attacks or yelling matches. You get to kind of see the arguments and the questions both ways and kind of how it's judged. I don't think it's a winner and a loser type thing, even though there is a scoring that you'll see in here. But I think it's really deep conversations that we don't get to see in these formats very often. Most of the time, they turn into screaming matches or personal attacks or switching the topic to something else because maybe they're not as adept in that conversation, want to kind of revert the conversation to something else. And I think there's a time and place to be able to watch those types of videos on YouTube, or like Pierce Morgan will have his panel and they'll just get yelling and talking. So I think there's still an important part to listen to both sides of the argument. But what I love about this is just more, I guess, civilized, I guess is the best way to look at it, because they don't talk over each other. There's not personal attacks. They're just simply answering the questions using their programming and then having the other programs judge how they did. So I want to go through this video for a little bit. I don't know if we'll go through the whole thing or not. Love to have your comments on it, feedback. Love to talk to you about this stuff. I don't know how that's going to open up my comments to probably ugly stuff too, but I think this is important to talk about, and a conversation we've had as humans since the very beginning of time is God exist or not? And that's kind of what this video is trying to tackle in a very unique way. Love his channel. Please make sure you subscribe. I'll put a link in the details, but you got to check out his channel. He does some really good stuff. So let's watch this first video. Look at that. Yeah, so you can see he's got all these different AI models that come up with their different scoring methods up to a 50-point scale. So if you're perfect on everything, you'd get a 50. If you missed all of it, you'd be a zero, which I don't think that would ever be, probably a zero with the other programs also doing the debating. So, but it's pretty interesting to watch how these programs kind of lean which direction based on the answers of the other programs. So it really is a cool use of AI. I think it's really cool. And I love his graphics. I just really like the way he's put these videos together. Try to comment and like all of his stuff. And I hope that through my video, maybe you'll watch his video and like his channel as well. But just love this conversation. So let's see kind of where it goes. But you can get an idea that he basically is going to pit these two debates, these two AI programs against each other with these guys doing the judging. That's the ultimate question. The problem of pain, the problem of evil. Does suffering and evil disprove God's existence? So the AI program that's representing the atheistic worldview is going to start answering that question. Let's see where it goes. I, I think it's interesting right here, right off the bat. It would have the desire and ability to prevent unnecessary suffering. Even the atheistic viewpoint has to say unnecessary suffering. So that means there is still necessary suffering. There's still suffering that happens that we know there's a necessity for that. Now, it's going to get to the extremes in these arguments that why do we have, children getting cancer, and there's things that are just we just can't see the necessity of that suffering. But I also would ask myself, what is the suffering he's preventing that we never do see? And if there is evil in the world, why is there also so much good? And I think many times we focus way too much on the negative when there is so much good that's out there. And there's so many times what looks unnecessary or looks like suffering turns out to be a very incredible thing. I've seen it in my own life where I didn't know why it was happening at the time it was. When I look back, I wouldn't have changed it. In fact, it was something that was important for my growth. Now, does that relate to every kind of suffering? No, just the same thing. There is some necessary suffering, and there may be some unnecessary suffering. That doesn't mean there's not a loving God that's on the end of it knowing that there will be something good that will come from it. Maybe, and it might not even be in this lifetime. Death isn't the punishment from this unnecessary suffering, because it isn't the end. That's another thing that the atheist versus believer is going to have a harder time with, is we don't believe that death is the end as a believer. As an atheist, I think they do. They just think it's nothing. It's just over. It's just done. When we have that belief that there is something after this, that what we're doing here will lead on into eternity. The skills that we're going to lose, the perseverance, the patience, the grit, the other things that we're going to learn, we can't learn without going through it. There's Everybody knows there's a big difference between watching the movie, reading the book, and living the life. There's just something different. Some of the most immense emotions that we'll ever experience sometimes come from the most joy and the most suffering. So let's continue watching. Absolutely. There's natural disasters, but even there's we've learned more and more that there is a necessity for that, to have the earth inhabitable by all the different creatures that are on it. I'm amazed at how diverse this planet really is. When you look at, especially if you look at the entire universe, to have me be on a planet that can also live with all the other organisms, and they all work and they all breathe and we're all eating, and it's just amazing how fine-tuned this planet is, let alone the universe and mathematics and gravity and all those kind of things. You look at the DNA structures, you look at the fine-tuning of just our planet alone is unreal. And maybe some of these natural disasters that they're discovering as part of those processes to make the earth inhabitable. And unfortunately, a lot of times the natural disasters he's talking about are some of the most desirable places on the earth, because they've created that abundance in those areas because of those natural processes. I saw a report, I think, that 80% of the earth's population is within like 100 miles of the coast, just because that's some of the most inhabitable, beautiful, great parts of the earth where people want to live. But they're also in the way of the train, so to speak, when the earthquake hits, the tsunami hits, whatever happens to hit. And to say that a natural disaster is evil unto itself is just like saying, okay, it's evil if a lion eats a baby or something. It's horrific, it's tragic, it's horrible. I'm not trying to downplay it, but we wouldn't necessarily call that an evil. It's just a lion doing what it's doing. It's food. It doesn't know that it's not. It doesn't have a moral compass like we do. But because we have a moral compass, we had to have a moral compass giver. We have to have something that says, okay, we know that's evil because we know the opposite of that thing. We know that's not the ideal. We don't know why all the time why that thing happened, but we know it's not right. We have an ought to and ought not to. We have this sense of moral that's outside of ourselves. It's outside of our evolution. It's outside of our genetics. It's outside of our cultural, our time frame. There's certain things we just know throughout all human history. We're just not the best. Whether we label it evil or not, sometimes it depends on the cultural context of it. But we have some things that are outside of that, that are outside of whether you live on the American continent or the Asian continent. There's going to be things that you just know universally are things you shouldn't do, that are what we would label as evil. So, and then when it comes to horrific acts of violence, a lot of that's consequence of that free will, that God thought it was worth the risk. He basically saw what the truest form of free will, the most choice, would give them the chance to choose wrong, or choose the wrong thing or the right thing. But being able to give them that, he felt it must have been worth that risk to be able to allow those things to happen. Violence is horrible, but a lot of that will come down to free will. It comes down to human suffering, which is most of the suffering I think we see in the world is from the human suffering. Yes, natural disasters happen. Yes, there's diseases. Yes, there's those types of things. But I think when you label most evils, it's going to come down to human choice. I think a lot of it is what is profound suffering versus not, what is consequence, what is judgment for sin, what is love in its purest form, is to allow some of the suffering to happen. And I also have to think, if there is so much evil in the world, there can't be a God. Well, why is there so much good in the world if there isn't a God? And how many things did he prevent or has stopped? I mean, I hear countless stories of people that that were going to be into an area where there was going to be some sort of problem, and they got a cell phone call, or their alarm didn't go off or something like that. Now, I'm not saying that why did that person's alarm go off and that one didn't? There's going to be a reason, but there's amazing how many times where there is some prevention of some of this stuff, that God has laid out, that has made preventions we may never know about. Now we can see the suffering end because that's what we see the consequence of the people that did die in that situation. But there's also a lot of people that didn't. Like, it's amazing how often that things are actually prevented. The suffering is mitigated. I don't think it's just rampant. I don't think the suffering isn't under his control as well. Now, does that excuse why again there is certain suffering there's not other times? No, no, but I still trust him to make that decision more than me. I still trust that there is a reason behind it. There is a prevention of a certain level. I don't think there's just mindless suffering. I really don't. I think a lot of it will have a purpose, whether it's for that individual purpose, that culture, that time, that space, something in God's plan to make all this work. And I just hope I'm in tune with that to where I can either mitigate the suffering or that I'm ready to be prepared for it and use that as a challenge, or use that as a reason why I'm going through it, is to be what God wants me to be by going through and persevering. I, I paused it too late, but isn't that kind of cool? It'll show you each AI and kind of which one it does. At the end, he'll do a tally and kind of show you which one kind of lean more towards the atheistic arguments or the believers' arguments. I think it's just a great part of this video, just kind of show which ones had their biases. It's such a great argument. It's one of the best arguments of Christianity. And really, we haven't gotten within 100 miles of Christianity yet. We're just talking about whether there's a God or whether there's a not a God. You know, theistic view worldview or the atheistic worldview. But I think it's really important that this idea that there is something outside of ourselves that creates a moral standard, that we can say something is evil or something is suffering, because we can know that the opposite of that thing. Just like we know what a rainy day looks like because we've seen a sunny day. We know what not cancer looks like because we've seen what cancer looks like. You know, we have that idea, but a lot of it is outside of ourselves when it comes to morality and what we label as evil versus what is just part of processes. And it's often said, I can't remember off the top of my head, that most of our suffering is in our own minds. So if you're removing all suffering, I mean, how much suffering would you have to remove before you'd believe in God? Like, how much suffering would have to be completely gone? All of it? So you have no suffering whatsoever at all. You, I don't think that would be loving. I don't think God would look at us and say, okay, that's the best you can be. That's the best you can prove to yourself. I mean, you talk to anybody that they've grown from adversity. If you lost all that, I don't think God would have these loving creatures. They'd just be mindless babies all the time. They'd never grow up. They'd never mature. They'd never have any grit. Anything that would come against them that had any kind of hint of suffering, they just collapse. I think the strongest people in our history and our society have gone through some stuff and come out the other side. That, I think, is what God's trying to create. Now, unfortunately, and He's allowed certain things we just may not understand. Like, and part of it's probably Him going, guys, you don't have to make it this hard. You don't have to suffer this much. Trust in me, trust in the process, learn through this experience, and don't unnecessarily suffer. We suffer more in our minds than we do in reality. Now, that doesn't mitigate true suffering, illnesses, natural disasters, like He's trying to say here, but I think that's a low percentage of the suffering they're talking about. The bigger percentage of the suffering is just day to day stuff. And this is a character building exercise as much as anything else. Sorry, let's keep reading or keep listening. I think it's an important part. Now, I would say on the atheistic worldview that it again goes to the extreme. Like, what's the point of some of the suffering? What is the point of a child at 2 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, whatever it is, getting some sort of incurable cancer, some sort of yes, I'm not going to sit there and say that's not challenging. I'm not going to sit there and say completely blind, like, oh, God is good. And he'll, yeah, yeah, that's challenging. That stuff's tough. But I still believe that there's still more good that does come out of it, because I have seen some of the things that people have done with fundraising. I've seen people with advancements of technology to overcome some of those things have been incredible. And even the stories of how mature those kids are and how much they help their family and how they go through it and realize that it sucks. You know, it's painful, but there's still good that can come from it. It's not 100% evil. And that's why I believe there really isn't anything truly evil unto itself. Evil has to steal from good. It's something that's usually good that becomes corrupted over time. And the more it gets corrupted, the more evil it gets in our eyes. But almost everything starts as good, it just becomes corrupt, it becomes evil. Yeah. How many times have we solved a problem because of suffering? How many times have we seen some sort of wrong and we try to make it right? And how much better comes of that thing that was meant for harm that turns into good. That happens so much throughout our history. So if the atheists just said, hey, all that suffering should be gone, there's so many things that wouldn't advance. There wouldn't be any grit, there wouldn't be any perseverance, there wouldn't be any self-sacrifice, there wouldn't be any communities, there's so much stuff we would lose if suffering was completely off the table. And I think that's what shows God loves us enough to punish evil, to judge, and to let us fall a few times to get ourselves back up with him being there to prevent it from being too much. I got to think there's times I know in my own life that he's had to have prevented some things from happening. There's a couple times I almost died, and I'm sure he prevented some of those things. Why? I don't know why he still wants me around. I don't know. But and why somebody else didn't. I had an experience that I should have been a lot worse off and was okay, and then I had somebody else that had the same experience and they ended up a lot worse. I don't know why those differences happen. Some of it is our own choices of how we accept some of the things that are happening to us. But I think that's an important part of why there is suffering and pain in the world. See what he I don't agree with this. And this is where scientists will be able maybe have studies or that type of stuff, but I don't think evolutionary processes promote social cohesion. Oh boy, butchered that. Because what you get is empires. What you get is people that say, okay, our social construct, our family is above yours, our family's protected. We're going to destroy everybody else around us. So I don't think that ethics grow from evolution. I think it's something outside of ourselves. It's a process that we can see when something is not good. Even people that were doing horrible evil still go, okay, I think this has gone too far. You'll still have people that go, okay, wait a minute, this we got to dial this back. This probably is getting a little bit too crazy. And I think if it was just simply an evolutionary process that we get more ethical over time, I think defeats evolution because it's an idea of survival, strongest, the fittest, or the smartest, or the most adapted to an environment, weeds out the ones that aren't. That's part of kind of why this species has accelerated and this one disappeared as part of their family line, if you believe in the evolutionary theories. I think there's some huge holes in that, but that's a whole nother debate. I mean, maybe he'll have a debate about that. But for this, the idea that ethics or moral good or is some sort of social cultural thing. Now sure, some cultures may be a little closer to better than good, but almost all of them start good, start idealistic, and start to deteriorate. I think that's what you see in the world, even from the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Started out good and became corrupt. Everything kind of starts from good and ends up being corrupted over time, either by bad decisions, environmental pressures, or other societies. Like if you're saying that just it's an evolutionary process, then we would have utopia by now, wouldn't we? I mean, what stopped everything from? Why would there be a war ever again? If ethics are a voluntary or a evolutionary process, it seems like it's always trying to negate that. It always seems like it's trying to pull backwards with wars and famine and people treating each other bad. As powers rise up, they squish the small people. It's been throughout our entire history. It's probably worse in the past, and there's been ebbs and flows of that as empires have rised and fallen. But that's a lot of times why they rise. They rise on these great ideas and they collapse underneath them. That's what we see throughout human society. To say evolution is part of that process, I think falls incredibly short because it doesn't prove the things that are outside of that with moralistic rules that we all try to adhere to. And when we see an empire collapse, we kind of point to it and say, well, that's the reason you're going to do it. We're not going to do the same thing. Oh, we're idealistic. Here we go. We got this great country, great nation, great empire, whatever it is. And then over time, it just starts to kind of collapse in on itself again. So I don't see that being an evolutionary process. That's a strong argument. It really is. It's okay. How do you explain? We would have say on the at least the Christian side, again, this is just believer and atheist, that a lot of it has to do with the fall of Adam and Eve. That corruption of being away from the perfect and away from that garden, that corruption led to some of those things just breaking down and having issues as it's just removed from that holiest of sources, as it's removed from the fall. So a lot of it is blamed on the fall for a lot of these things over human history and how we tried to justify or come up with it. But it's definitely a tough argument of childhood diseases or these some of these natural disasters. But like I said earlier, some of these what we call natural disasters, are they evil? No, they're part of the process of allowing the earth to be inhabitable by all of its wonderful creatures, and us especially have to have some of these natural processes. Now, why did God create it that way? I don't know. There's got to be some reason that he wanted that diversity, he wanted those things to work, he wanted us to experience all that this creation can do. And so some of that's going to lead towards, okay, some of it's going to have to be a little dangerous. Some of it's going to have to blow up once in a while. Some of it's going to move. Some of the tectonic plates are going to have to move as just part of the pressures of making all this work. And unfortunately, we're in the way of that sometimes. Like I said before, I think it was like 80% of the world's population. I could be wrong, 70, 80% of the world's population is within 100 miles of all the coasts around the entire world. Like if an alien was smart or something, they'd just drop a big boulder or something in the ocean and just tidal wave, the first 100 miles or whatever, 50 miles in, would wipe out half the earth. So but because those are the areas that people want to live, but there's also the areas that have that much activity, which also breeds more plant life and animal life and all the other things that just make Earth so beautiful, has some of that stuff that's part of it to make it work. Now, God maybe he could have created it without it, but maybe it wouldn't have been as beautiful or as recognized as beautiful as part of it, and wouldn't lead to what he's trying to do to restore that to absolute perfection. So I, is it a result of human choices? I think it might be. In my worldview, it might have been Adam and Eve's sin that led to why these things have to break down like they do. But that is definitely a strong argument on the atheistic case, that why do we have some of those? But I think that suffering levels on the low end of the scale. I think most of the suffering we're talking about is more based on human choices. There it is again. No apparent purpose, just like no what seems to be unnecessary suffering. So yes, there is some gratuitous, what he says here is gratuitous, but again, he's setting a standard of, oh, how do you know it's gratuitous? Why do you call it evil? Why do you call it gratuitous suffering? If you knew it had a purpose, would it then be gratuitous? If you knew, okay, that sucks. What you're going through, what that person's going through, what earthquake happened, that does suck. But because you know the purpose, you're able to say, okay, that isn't gratuitous. The reason we know it's gratuitous suffering is because we think it has no apparent purpose. But you still have to say no apparent. You can't just say serves absolutely no purpose, because people would be able to say, well, there might be a purpose to it. We just don't know what the purpose is. God does. And again, I think he's prevented it from being overly gratuitous. I think there's definitely times where he says, nope, can't go that far. Not there. Now, why is it that person doesn't have to go through the suffering and this one does? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know what benefit that's going to have, but I know there is one. I know there is a purpose because of that belief in something that's outside of myself, a standard that's outside of myself. I can't explain. The fine tuning, I can't explain. There's so many things I can't explain without there being some sort of intelligent mind that's outside of time, space, and matter that orchestrated the whole thing. And my job is to just get to know that person in God as best I can, to be in line with that will as best I can, because it's better than mine. My will lets myself down all the time. His doesn't. So again, even this sentence, well constructed, and that's great. Programs are great. I just love this debate. I think it's amazing. Still uses the big word gratuitous suffering with no apparent purpose. So again, I would ask him, is there any purpose to that suffering? And we just don't know what it is. The answer would have to be yes. We don't know what that purpose might be. And who orchestrated that purpose is what we call God in the first place. All right, let's keep listening. That's a good question. I think that's really important there. There's things we can't experience in heaven that we can here, because we are in this time, space, matter, stuck in this human body, stuck in time. stuck in a location, stuck in a weather pattern, stuck, there's certain things we can't experience, like the heartache of losing a loved one, the heartache of losing your family pet. I mean, there is some severe heartache that you just cannot explain unless you've been through it. And even people that sit there and try to go through an experience and they haven't been through it and they try to make you feel better, you just know, okay, they don't really know what I'm going through. So going through it is better than not. And I think that's what she's trying to say here is that, yes, this is a crucible. There's just things that happen in this reality that cannot happen in heaven, not only because we can see God and we're in a different state, but there's just things here that are as real as God could make them. A reality that is as real as it matters. It really does matter. There's consequence, there's penalty, there's judgment, there's victory, there's joy, there's sadness. Some of the greatest joy is from some of the greatest sadnesses because we are actually in the mud. We're in the existence that we can't get other places, and why this is such a drop in all eternity, but it's such a crucial part of why we're here. And I'm sure that's why God has so much patience for us, why he's waited so long for another return, or why he hasn't flooded the earth again like the Noah story. Some of the stories that we know on the believer side is because I think of his love, his just giving us as many chances as we possibly can. And that is a loving God with a loving purpose behind this whole thing. So I think that's an important thing. And this might be a stupid analogy, but I remember the other day I had like a football game, basketball game, can't remember what it was recorded, and then somebody told me the score. So then I was like, oh, I don't need to watch it. And I watch it, and then I remember watching it, and my team that ended up winning was like way down. I'm like, oh, this is kind of exciting. They got down, they rallied back, but I already knew the outcome, so it didn't it changed kind of the thrill of going through it because I already knew the outcome. So I think that's what he's basically saying here. If we're already in heaven, we already have certain tools that'll be aware to us that we won't get the experience of the rush of the unknown or the true pain or the physical pain or the I remember there's a movie, I can't even remember. You guys can probably put in the comments where this guy, I think it was an alien or something, like sneezed for the first time and never experienced a sneeze. And was like, oh, this is not what is this? A sneeze, and how do you explain a sneeze to an alien or to an angel or to a demon or something like that? Like, what do you mean? Your body just all of a sudden has to expel a bunch of air really quickly? So there's something about being in it and doing it that's always going to be different than reading, talking, watching, or in heaven where those choices now have that has more the purpose behind it, so you're not as intense with it because you know it's just going to work out. It's like, well, okay, yeah, I broke my leg, but I know in 10 days it'll be healed and I don't have to worry about it and I'll be fine. Yeah, so there's something that's why I think this reality is so important, that it is a true experience that we can't get anywhere else. Hmm. Okay, so he's basically saying, yeah, if we did know all the purpose of it, then we would be like God. And I think that's one characteristic of God, but I think that's definitely not all the characteristics that make him God. But that's definitely a good point. It's like, okay, if we just knew everything, then we wouldn't have the need for any knowledge or trying to work things out or try to persevere or do any of the things that we can do by being outside of that purpose or that knowledge of what God has. I don't want to have to worry about it. Job, the book of Job is really perfect where he basically says, hey, would you have any idea how to run any of this, even for a day? Would you be able to orchestrate and run all of this stuff that's going on? The answer would be absolutely not. And you probably wouldn't want to, because I think you'd then be able to see some of the things we care about so much really don't matter. And some of the things we don't matter really do. We always seem to get that part backwards. So let's see what the response is. I think, yes. Why not? Why couldn't a profound God uh, y- you have to have one on the other, because some of the most profound joy comes from recovering from the suffering, or there's just feelings that we get that don't come to the level without some of the suffering. Now, why does it have to be that way? I don't know, because it just expands our capability, expands what we consider joy or suffering. It's amazing how oftentimes that people will think they can't do something and then get pushed past that point, and how much that grows their character. But then you see the people that do crumble under that never recover from it as well. But these are experiences that have to have such extremes to really see what we do and where we turn when we are in those situations. And I think that that statement, I don't think, for me, it doesn't stand up. God created, because of his love, he created stuff that allowed us to experience as much as we possibly can. So I don't think you can have one without the other. Okay. So are you saying that if somebody has 100 suffering, they need to have 100 joy? I don't think you can. I don't think it works that way sometimes. Now, why does it seem sometimes that people do have 100 suffering and only 50 joy? I hope you're getting kind of the idea what I'm trying to say here. I don't know. That's the part I don't know with God, because I don't know what he's going to turn that into and turn it into 1,000 joy. So, but I do think that that's his end goal and will be where we're heading with all this, is a something that was meant to be harmful, suffering, and all that will be turned into joy. Maybe it won't be in this lifetime, but I think that's what God's ultimate plan is going to be, is this restoration, to use all these experiences for something that will be joy beyond all understanding. That's something in our scripture that talks about all the time. There's some times where we just don't think there's going to be anything good that happens from it. I looked at my own life and there's certain things that I would not want to go through again, but I look back on it and I wouldn't have changed it. And I think that's something that is very important on this worldview. I would really like an example of that. What is the immense suffering at microscopic levels? Are they really suffering? Is it a conscious suffering, or is he just talking about like bacteria that's dying? And so I may need to clarify that as well, because I would want to then, again, it says no apparent purpose. Again, we don't know what that purpose is. Do we even know it's really suffering? If we're talking microscopic levels of just things dying and living and dying and living, I don't know. Is there, I don't know the purpose again, and even he has to admit no apparent purpose. If he knew there was a purpose for it, he wouldn't use it as an argument, because, oh well, we know that that thing needs to eat that thing because that thing eats this thing, and then that thing produces the air that then provides the life for everything. You know what I mean? Once, if we knew what the purposes were, even on a microscopic level, then it would change what we'd call evil in the first place. Or we might be more profound and say, okay, we have actually found truest version of evil, and that means evil and the devil does exist. So it's almost the counter of that argument as well. If we get so deep in the purpose that it is just purely for evil's sake, which I don't think that exists in a sense, because I think even evil has to steal from good. It just corrupts the things that are good. I can't think of anything that is just evil for itself or unto itself. It's always a corruption of something else. So I'd love a comment on that. Let me know what you think about that. But I always think, and that's kind of a C.S. Lewis kind of thing, that just everything starts as good and becomes corrupted and becomes evil. It's a great question. I mean, that is something where we look at some of the suffering. It doesn't have an apparent reason. We just don't know what that purpose or reason is yet. And and I think that he thinks it must be worth it. I think that's what this is saying. And what I would say as a believer, I would say, I don't know. But I would say that he must think that some of this stuff is worth it. And I still think there's things he has prevented. We just don't know what it is because it was prevented. So I still ask that question. If there is no God because there's evil in the world, why is there so much good in the world if there isn't a God? It'd be the same argument. Let's see what we got. I think that's part. He must think it's worth it. He must think that the suffering that we have, whether it's real or not, he must think that the evil that we call evil is or not, must be worth it. There must be a divine reason why he lets some of the evil happen to certain people, not to other people, and why one person crosses the street and gets hit by a car, another person's one hitting the person's brakes and stops. Yes, there's got to be certain reasons. I often wonder that in my own life, that why did God step in this case and not the other case? And he knows there's a reason for it. He's allowing it to happen or stopping it from happening. But I think that there's way more that he stops than allows. I just know that to be true, and we just don't see it. There's just so many things that could go wrong that don't. There's just so many things in this world that are evil, but there's so many more things that are good, that are pushing down that evil. We just spend way too much time looking at the evil. We don't look at all the good things that happen even within that evil, or why that evil would be allowed to exist. Now, would we want to eliminate all evil? Probably. That's our humanistic nature. It's also something that's outside of ourselves. Why she's talking about some sort of conscious moral standard that's outside of ourselves, that we do aspire to that. But I think all of us would realize that if all of it was gone, it wouldn't be the life we would want us to live, or kids to live, or anything. We want to remove all suffering, yes, but we have to also realize that there is some suffering that is necessary, that is has a purpose. So I think that's a great question. I mean, I think that really is the great question there. And then I would ask, okay, Mr. Atheist, what suffering would you allow? Because if you lowered all the suffering that's happening right now down to that standard, you'd still be able to see all the people that thought that that's the worst suffering you could suffer. You know what I mean? So if we have our standards kind of up here at 100, and you lower it to 50, that 50 becomes the 100. And now all of a sudden we realize stubbing our toe is shouldn't happen. There shouldn't be any corners where we could hit our toe against the bed. Or step on a Lego. I'm really not trying to downplay it, but I'm just trying to go from the extreme of what we're talking about also to the extreme on the other side, and realize that all suffering cannot be mitigated. That the suffering that is in the world, I think, is allowed for a certain extent because of either judgment, because of sin, because of human choices, or because of the fallen state of the world. But God allows for it. I still think He's sovereign over all of it. And He does allow it with some sort of purpose in mind. We just don't know what it is. And if we did, like she's saying, we just become robots. We just become puppets if we knew every reason, every outcome, every purpose for everything, without having to have some trust, some faith, some understanding, trying to solve the problem, trying to fix it, trying to make it not happen anymore. There's something in those efforts that is more character building and worth it to God than if those things are removed. And I think that's an important part of this argument. I don't think you can. I don't think we if we don't have those things, we don't have the opposite of those things to their extreme as well. And he must think that that's worth it to have those things be a possibility because of what it can be on the other side. And genocides and things like that are the human choices that we make, where one society says they're better than another. One human, one family, one street, one city, one nation just builds itself up to be better than another one, that then leads to the extermination of whatever is dehumanized. I think most of it's a dehumanization that allows most of this to happen, which is that part of that human choice. Now, illness in children and those natural disasters, probably the hardest of those arguments, but violence and genocide and wars and all that, that's a man-made construction. We know it's wrong, and we know we fight against it. And both sides of a warring nations, both sides think they're right, and the other side is the evil side. That's happened throughout all of human history. I think that's an important question, is why doesn't he make himself more present? But I would say, as a believer, we see him every day. We see him all over the place. We see him in everything that's there. The atheists are the one that don't see him anywhere. So I think it depends on that worldview. And you see the people that are crushed by this suffering are the ones that aren't learning through it. And I still think there'll be something on the other side that they will gain from that, that they can't gain while they're here or get crushed by it. But I also think that God will make sure that there is a way out, that there is help and guidance wherever possible, and gives us as much patience as possible. So I don't think God can create this world any other way. Otherwise, I believe he would. If he really is what I think he is, he could have created the world differently. He found that this is the best way to get what he wants out of everything, and to give us the choices and decisions and everything that we get to have. So I think this is the best it could have been, or at least as close to the best it can be, with also being able to have that the knowledge that our free will is going to have issues, that's going to have a choice to choose evil over good, choose something other than him and his plan and his will. And so I think his that's part of the crucible of what we're doing here. Hmm. I She probably should answer this one before I start kind of going into it. But my first thought again is yes, there's going to be people that get crushed by the suffering. There's going to be people that are going to lose their faith. But I think there's way more that grow through it, whether it turns them to religion or not, that will say that that experience strengthened me. That most people in it don't like it. The discipline is not fun. All the things that we talk about as a society about how to grow and move through it and move past things. Some of the people that we honor and elevate and respect the most are the people that have been through stuff and gone through the other side with a positive attitude that don't get crushed by it. So yes, there's examples of people that are going to get crushed by it, that just cannot handle it, that just the suffering in their head and their body and their mind and their family is just too much to handle and they just completely shut down. I'm not going to say that's not going to happen, but I'm also going to say there's way more, I think, on the other side. There's way more people that go through that suffering that look back and say, I would not change it. I don't want to go through it again, but wouldn't change it because what it led to, the doors it opened, the strength it opened, the perseverance it opened, the strength I didn't even know I had that came out of me, the joy I didn't know that I had. Some of the things I would never had experienced had I not gone through some stuff. So, yes, I think it's sad when people get crushed by it, but I think the ones we elevate and are most excited about are the ones that do elevate over it. And I think those are the ones that we write books and movies and sitcoms and all the things that we see people that really look like they're crushed and they get back up. That is the people we honor and celebrate the most because we want that in ourselves. We want to be the person that has everything go wrong, family, friends, job, car, all the stuff gone, suffered, and yet rise above it and power through it. That's the people we aspire to be. So if God took away all that suffering, we wouldn't have any of those types of people. And I think that'd be a sad society. I agree. Yeah. Just like I said, if you knew God already existed, it would change how you would react to certain things so you wouldn't know how you would have reacted without it. I know it's a stupid analogy, but I use the same one about the sporting event. If I already know the outcome and which team is going to win, watching it again changes a little bit and there just isn't any drama with it. Maybe there's a little bit like, oh, it's cool to see how they won, but once you already know they won or once you already knew the outcome or it changes how much you have to persevere through because you just know the outcome of it. So I think having that separation, that veil, just that distance allows these choices to be more authentic because they don't have any coercion or anything that could give you additional biases or just not allow the growth that's necessary to happen. So I think she's nailing it on the head right here. Or we just don't know it. I still think there's times where, and I've acknowledged it more and more when I see something lucky or just something where the smallest thing, I just give a little wink and just say, "Thanks, God. Thanks for just avoiding that little inconvenience." I just give credit to that because I don't know how many times He's done it on a way bigger scale that I can't acknowledge. So I just made it a habit where if something just happens, I drop something and it doesn't hit my foot, something like that, or my keys or something, I remember something real quick and I don't have to run all the way back home. Or there's just little things like that that I kind of call the God winks. Just the little moments like, "Hey, I'm helping you out. I am here. Here's the little stuff," because you're not seeing the big stuff that I'm doing. You just can't. You're not seeing the big worldly things and all the things I'm orchestrating for the goodness of all the stuff. And I think that attitude is one of the biggest difference between a believer and an atheist is this idea that there is a God that is walking us through this, that has a plan for all this. So I think this is probably, I don't know if she's going to score the best on this one. I can't remember which one was the best score, but I think this one's just nailing it. There's that argument again. I don't I need to understand that more. I can't understand why evolution explains that we know something is morally wrong. When I've seen so many times within cultural that those things ebb and flow a lot more than universal things we just know are bad. We just There's certain things that transcend evolution or culture or time or so many of the other human constructs of society that this is there's still things outside of it. Now, some things, yeah, a certain society might elevate or punish differently because of some sort of what they call sin or evil or something like that. But there's still a lot of them that have been universal that are outside of all of us. Like if I go to China 2000 years ago, there's still going to be the same kind of wrong, selfishness, certain murders, certain treatment of elderly or kids. I mean, certain those things aren't always going to be looked at as wrong. Even the suffering we're talking about here, it's going to always be looked at as evil or wrong or just not right, regardless of evolutionary societal changes. That's why I think it's outside of that. Now, maybe there's certain things within that still could fall in that category, but I think a majority of it is outside of that. I don't think that's a strong argument for that. Nope. Or don't observe. Again, how much are we not observing? I I, I bet you if the veil was pulled back, God would be like, look at all that I have prevented that you don't see, and you don't have to see that isn't full evil running absolute rampant. Because I would say that if there isn't a God, why is there so little evil? If you call everything evil, can it get worse? You would say yes. You would say absolutely yes. It could be a million times more evil on the planet and still could be worse. So we know that evil, in a sense, is capped or is at least being held back by goodness, whether it's our choices or God or anything else is holding back some of that evil. No apparent purpose. Again, there's that word. Why does he allow suffering that serves no apparent purpose? Parent. If it was apparent, it would have a purpose and you wouldn't call it suffering. Perceivable benefit. Same thing. Possibly, but he didn't. So even there, you have to admit, okay, if he really is a powerful God, he would not allow the suffering that he's allowing. But I think he is capping it. I think there is times where it could be worse. Sadly, sometimes it's like, wow, and that's probably why he had to flood the whole planet. If we believe it with the Noah's flood, how bad must it have been where God finally did say, okay, enough's enough, starting over, flooding the whole planet, starting over. I mean, that goes to show it can be worse to the point where it's okay, it's time to start over. It's still a belief, it's still a faith. There's still things that always will come down to faith. Almost everything, when you start chopping it down, will come down to some sort of belief or faith. Whether it's scientific things, you just have faith that the instruments are working correctly, that it is repeatable, that the why behind it is there. All of it eventually comes down to faith. Now, religious people and the religious term has kind of stolen the word faith in a way. But when you look at just what faith is, we all have it. We don't live by evidence. We don't live by proof. We live by evidence. We live by constants. We live by virtual certainties. We live by most likely outcomes. That's what we live by, not by proof. So eventually it all comes down to faith. It all does. If you cut it and you just keep cutting it down, eventually you're going to hit faith. Faith is bottom. I nailed it. I absolutely believe that. And again, it's this idea we see an animal that's suffering. We don't know what that suffering is for that animal. I saw this thing that showed that the different levels that animals and humans perceive even pain. that it's happening around them instead of to them. There's some interesting studies that are out there that just kind of keep coming out what the relationship is for human suffering. I even saw that plants can scream or experience that they are getting cut or eaten or something like that, which is like the, so it really does question what is consciousness when we start looking at that type of stuff. But again, it's something where God says that okay, that needs to exist because of these other reasons, that it's overall a good in the long run, that it will be restored if it isn't over time, that there is a purpose behind it. It's said it so many times here, we just don't know what that purpose is. If we did, it would change our outcome and our response to everything. And I think God says he wants those responses because he knows what the outcome's going to be. Great question. Again, if there isn't a God, what standard are we using? What standard are we using if it's not in within ourselves? Because if it's in ourselves, my standard's gonna be different than somebody else. Somebody's gonna say, "Hey, you looks like you're suffering." It's like, no, 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 no. Or yes, but it's because this is what happens because of that. Or yeah, I remember there's a poem, and maybe somebody else can put in the comments that basically said, "Hey, your kid fell off a horse and broke his leg. That's really bad. But then there was a war, and he wasn't drafted, so he didn't have to go to war. So now it's a good thing that he broke his leg. But then because he didn't go to war, he didn't meet the girl or didn't get skills, or it kind of played out this whole thing that the guy kept saying, is this good, is this bad, is this good, is this bad, and it kept switching based on new information, based on what the purpose of that thing would have been, or what it prevented, or what it started. Again, we don't have that scope of being able to look back and see all the consequences of all the actions and the purposes that are either self-created or not. But I still think a lot of the suffering does come down to human choice and human actions and reactions to things that are in our minds and in reality. A lot of sufferings in our minds. It really is. Let's continue. I don't want this. I wanted to try to keep this shorter, but I mean, I think there's like 20 minutes left of the video, so we're not going to get through the whole thing. So maybe I'll just end it here. Let's actually go through this last little argument here with the atheistic worldview, and then let's pick it apart one more time. Then we'll be done. Then hopefully you'll watch the rest of the video. It just keeps going. It's just a great video. Okay, so that's a very interesting point right there. You're saying that evolution is some of these roles, but then evolution seems to be extremely violent, which would lead to more evil. So how can evolution lead to our moralistic, ethical views? Yet it seems like it's actually trying to go the other way. It almost seems like our moralistic good is fighting against our evolutionary tendencies. So it's interesting that this is an argument against the moral argument he was making that was a positive. That's a pretty interesting twist. Yep. Evidence. Yes. What evidence are you providing? If there's new evidence, if there is purpose, it would change how we would call those things from good or evil if we had the purpose behind it. So because we don't have a purpose behind it, we either have to trust that there is no purpose and it's just evil for evil's sake, or we make the justification that we don't know what that purpose is, but we believe there's a good behind it. That's again going to be the difference here between atheist and believer views, is who do we point to for all of it? Nothing or something. I think that's going to be a part of it. So again, I want to try to keep this video as the longest I've done in a long time, but check out the rest of the video. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on. His other videos are great. Maybe I'll do another video, but didn't want this one to go on this long, but it's just so good. Can you see how much fun it is to be able to listen to peaceful debate and thoughtful debate and go back and forth and try to push why you think the way you think? I might be wrong on this stuff. I admit that there may be some things that I'm wrong, but that's why I'm trying to push my knowledge, trying to push the argument, trying to hear the other side as best I can without just turning into yell fest like Facebook and all this kind of stuff. You don't really get any dialogue. You just get people personal attacks and that's it. It's like that's not an argument. Tell me why you think evolution leads to more moral people. I don't think it does from my experience, but show me an example that might change my mind. Or maybe I've convinced you to take a look at it and say, okay, maybe I do need to look at the believer worldview and really start questioning why I think the world's so bad and why it's all evil for no reason. I mean, yeah, that's what we're doing these videos for. So, anyway, I'm going to stop the video here. I could keep going and going. I really enjoy doing this stuff, enjoy doing this stuff on the channel. please like, subscribe, comment. Let's get the conversation going. Let's see where this goes. But I don't mind having conversations with people. I think that's the fun part of being out there and trying to put your views and your comments to the test. So I enjoyed this video. Hope you did too, and we'll see you on the next one.